The morning I walked into my family's corporate headquarters wearing a cheap blouse and a temporary visitor badge, my sister-in-law screamed across the marble lobby that I was a pathetic charity case. She ordered security to throw me out on my very first day as a data entry clerk. Dozens of employees froze in place. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Whispers rippled through the atrium like wildfire. What she did not know was that, in exactly 5 hours and 15 minutes, I would be walking back through those same doors as the anonymous billionaire arriving to buy her entire world. She had no idea she had just publicly humiliated the woman who already owned 80% of the voting shares in the company she thought she ruled. My name is Naomi. I am 33 years old. And what happened between 8:45 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon that day is a story I have never told from beginning to end until now. Before I take you inside every single moment of the takedown that shattered my family piece by piece, drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from right now. Smash that like button and hit subscribe. If you have ever had to swallow your pride and smile through pain while an arrogant relative tried to break you in public, trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. The morning sun spilled through the towering glass walls of Apex Solutions, casting long golden shadows across the imported Italian marble. Apex was a mid-sized logistics firm my father Harrison had built into his personal monument to ego. The lobby was alive with employees clutching coffees, rushing to elevators, preparing for another ordinary day. None of them knew that day would not be ordinary. I had barely stepped through the revolving doors when she intercepted me. Lexi, my brother Cameron's wife. A woman who wore her unearned title of Human Resources Director like a loaded weapon. She was draped in an overly branded designer outfit that screamed of new money and deep insecurity. Her eyes narrowed the second she spotted me. And she did not wait for me to reach the security desk. She marched directly into the center of the atrium and blocked my path in front of everyone. "Stop right there, Naomi," she commanded, raising her voice loud enough that every employee within 30 feet turned their head. People slowed their pace. Curious eyes locked on us. "Lexi," I said evenly, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "Good morning. I am just heading up to the 4th floor to get my desk assignment." "You are not going anywhere except back out those doors," she announced, crossing her arms. "I just got off the phone with Harrison. We have decided that bringing you on board is way too much of a liability. Your father only offered you this data entry job because your mother begged him to take pity on you. But frankly, we cannot afford dead weight, not even family." I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang in the air. The murmurs around the lobby grew louder. This was a public execution designed to put the family disappointment back in her place. For years, they had spun a narrative that I was a failure because I refused to follow my father's rigid, misogynistic path. I had moved away, lived quietly, and built my venture capital firm from the ground up. Because I never flaunted my wealth or begged for their approval, they assumed I was destitute. Lexi took a step closer, looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "I mean, look at you," she scoffed, gesturing at my outfit. I was wearing a bespoke, unbranded charcoal suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe. But she lacked the refinement to recognize quiet luxury. "You show up on your first day looking like you bought your clothes at a thrift store. Did you really think you could just waltz into a professional environment after squandering your life on stupid startup fantasies? Cameron warned me you would be a disaster. But I did not think you would embarrass us before 9 in the morning. I assure you, Lexi, I am dressed perfectly for the business I am conducting today," I replied. My voice was calm, completely devoid of the panic she was trying so desperately to provoke. Her face flushed with hot irritation at my lack of tears. She had fully expected me to crumble, to beg for the minimum wage job, to ask her to call my father and plead on my behalf. When I did none of those things, her voice grew louder and harsher. "Do not talk back to me in my lobby," she snapped. "Cameron has been working 18-hour days to keep this company afloat. He is a brilliant chief operating officer. He does not have time to hold his little sister's hand while she pretends to be a working professional. You threw your life away, Naomi. You refused to listen to Harrison. You wasted whatever money you had. And now you expect us to clean up your mess. Well, the charity stops today. We are terminating you effective immediately. Security will escort you out. She snapped her fingers toward two large security guards near the reception desk. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but dutifully began walking toward us. The humiliation was supposed to break me right there on the polished marble floor. But I was not the scared 20-year-old girl they remembered. I felt no urge to defend myself. I felt no need to tell her Cameron was not a brilliant executive, but a corrupt thief who had embezzled millions to fund his sports cars and luxury vacations, driving Apex Solutions into catastrophic debt. They were drowning, and they thought kicking me off the boat would somehow save them. I reached up and calmly unclipped the temporary paper visitor badge from my lapel. I held it out to her. Lexi snatched it from my hand, a victorious smirk plastered across her face. "Smart girl," she sneered. Now turn around and walk out before I have them physically throw you out." I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression entirely unreadable. And then quietly, so quietly, she had to lean in to hear I said something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Tell your father-in-law that the board meeting in exactly 5 hours should be highly interesting. I highly recommend you and Cameron attend. It will be the most important meeting of your entire lives." Lexi scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You are completely delusional. That board meeting is for executive leadership and our new investors. It has nothing to do with a fired data entry clerk. Just deliver the message," I said smoothly. Then I turned on my heel and walked toward the revolving doors. I did not look back. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who owned the very ground beneath her feet. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I bypassed the crowded bus stop my family assumed I would be using. Instead, I walked straight to the curb where a sleek, armored black Maybach was waiting idly. The uniformed driver stepped out, opening the rear door with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather interior, the heavy door shutting solidly behind me, silencing the noise of city. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. My lead corporate attorney answered on the first ring. "Mitchell," I said, leaning back against the headrest. "Lexi just played her part perfectly. I am officially terminated from Apex Solutions." "Excellent," Mitchell replied, his voice humming with predatory legal efficiency. "I assume we are a go for phase 2. We are an absolute go," I instructed. "Begin the asset freeze on Apex Solutions immediately. Lock down their corporate accounts. Notify the bank that the majority shareholder is invoking the debt covenants. I do not want to leave Harrison or Cameron a single cent to maneuver with before 2 o'clock. Consider it done, Naomi. They will not be able to buy a cup of coffee with company funds by noon." I ended the call and looked out the tinted window as the box glided away from the gym. My family thought they had just disposed of their biggest embarrassment. They had absolutely no clue they had just finalized their own destruction. And the worst part for them, the absolute worst part, was still 5 hours away. My phone began to vibrate against the leather seat, a relentless, angry buzzing that signaled the beginning of the digital assault. I glanced down. The notifications flooded in from the family group chat, ironically titled Apex Legacy. My father, Harrison, struck first. His message was a wall of capitalized fury. "Naomi, what on earth is wrong with you? Lexi just called me practically in tears. You caused a massive scene in the atrium and forced her to call corporate security on your first day. You are an absolute disgrace. We try to throw you a lifeline and you publicly humiliate us." Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of Lexi claiming to be in tears, a second message popped up. "My mother, Catherine, I literally begged your father to give you this data entry job, Naomi. We opened our doors to you. We gave you a chance to finally do some honest work after your ridiculous entrepreneurial failures, and this is how you repay our generosity. Why can you not just be compliant and grateful for once in your life? Look at your brother. Cameron has been working himself to the bone. He carries the weight of the entire family on his shoulders. And you cannot even manage to walk through the front door without throwing a childish tantrum. I read the words with cold clinical detachment. Years ago, texts like these would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. I would have drafted a dozen apologies. But the gaslighting was so textbook now that it bordered on boring. It was the same script they had been reading from since I was a teenager. I stared at Catherine's praise for Cameron, remembering exactly how my brother had earned a reputation as the family genius. When I was 22, I spent months in drafting a comprehensive digital expansion strategy for Apex Solutions. I brought the binder to Harrison's home office outlining how the company could cut costs by 30%. Harrison chuckled, patted me on the shoulder, and told me to leave the heavy lifting to the men. He suggested I focus on finding a suitable husband instead. 2 months later, Cameron presented that exact same binder at a Sunday family dinner. He had simply swapped my name for his on the title page. Harrison treated Cameron to an extravagant steak dinner, praising his visionary mind, and promoted him to vice president of strategy. The very next day, Catherine purchased Cameron a $30,000 watch to celebrate his brilliance. When I tried to speak up, when I cried and pointed out it was my work, Catherine pulled me into the kitchen and pinched my arm hard. She told me this was being hysterical and bitter. She hissed that a good sister supports her brother's success instead of trying to steal his spotlight. They convinced everyone I was a jealous, unstable failure. They repeated the lie so often they actually believed it themselves. I locked my phone screen. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to defend myself so they could twist my words and play the victims. I was going to give them nothing but absolute silence. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time, it was a call, and the name on the screen made me sit up slightly straighter, Elijah. Elijah was my sister Brittany's husband. A brilliant, hardworking man with a master's degree in supply chain logistics from a top-tier university. He was also the only person in the extended family who possessed an ounce of integrity. Naturally, my family treated him appallingly. Harrison constantly undermined his operational plans, intentionally passing over his data-driven strategies to implement Cameron's disastrous ideas. Catherine made passive-aggressive comments about his background, treating him like an outsider. Brittany treated her husband as a mere accessory. Yet Elijah was the only person connected to the Apex bloodline who had ever treated me with genuine respect. He was the one who remembered my birthday. He was the one who quietly brought me a plate of food at family's barbecues when Catherine deliberately forgot to set a place for me at the main table. I answered, "Hello, Elijah. Naomi, are you okay?" His voice was hushed and urgent. Echoing slightly, he was hiding in a stairwell. I saw the whole thing go down in the lobby. I was watching from the mezzanine balcony. "I know you did not cause a scene." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I said, my voice steady and warm. "I appreciate you checking on me. I really do." "Lexi is parading around human resources like she just survived a hostage situation," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "But that is not why I am calling. Something really bad is happening on the executive floor. Cameron has been shredding documents and physically destroying hard drives in his office all morning. He looks like a cornered animal. Harrison is sweating bullets about this 2 o'clock board meeting with the new investors. I think the company is going under, Naomi. I think they brought you in to pin something on you." "They cannot pin anything on me if I do not work there," I replied smoothly. "And Elijah, you are right. The company is in critical condition. Cameron has been cooking the books for years and Harrison's has been signing off on it." "I knew it," Elijah breathed, a mixture of validation and dread in his tone. "I warned Harrison about the capital expenditure 6 months ago and he threatened to fire me. He has been funneling millions through phantom logistics vendors. We are paying for freight shipments that simply do not exist. The money is being routed to offshore accounts." A cold, satisfied smile touched my lips. My brother-in-law was a phenomenal asset, entirely wasted on a family of corrupt fools too arrogant to utilize his talents. "Elijah, I need you to listen very carefully. My tone shifted into commanding authority. I want you to leave that stairwell, walk directly to your office, and pack up your personal belongings. Take your framed degrees, your photographs, your coffee mug. Put them in your car and leave the Apex premises before 2 o'clock. Do not tell Brittany. Do not warn Harrison. Just quietly remove yourself from the blast radius. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Naomi, what exactly is going to happen at 2 o'clock? He asked quietly. Justice, I answered. Just pack your things, Elijah. You are the only decent person in that building, and I do not want you caught in the crossfire when the walls come crashing down. He asked no further questions. Understood, he said quietly. Take care of yourself, Naomi. You too, Elijah. I will be in touch very soon. I ended the call and let my phone drop into my lap. The heavy silence of the armored vehicle wrapped around me. The smooth hum of the engine a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unfolding inside Apex Solutions headquarters. I pulled a secured tablet from my leather briefcase and opened the master financial file. The irony was almost physically palpable. Just 3 weeks ago, my father had summoned me to a formal dinner. He put on a pathetic display of parental magnanimity, telling me the family was willing to throw me a lifeline, a data entry position paying barely above minimum wage. He framed it as a profound charity, a generous favor from a loving father to a misguided daughter. The reality staring back at me from the glowing screen was vastly different. Apex Solutions was bleeding cash at a catastrophic rate. Cameron had driven their operating margins into the ground. The company was drowning in defaulted loans, desperately fighting off aggressive creditors daily. Harrison thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. He firmly believed that today, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, a mysterious billionaire savior from a massive private equity conglomerate was arriving to bail them out. He had spent the last month practically groveling to my firm's representatives through third-party intermediaries, promising them the moon and the stars if they would just inject enough capital to save his crumbling legacy. He had absolutely no idea that the conglomerate buying out his defaulting debt was entirely owned by me. I had spent the last 12 months quietly acquiring every single piece of toxic debt Apex Solutions had generated. My firm had purchased their outstanding loans for pennies on the dollar through shell companies and subsidiary funds. Today was not a friendly bailout. It was a hostile, merciless debt-to-equity swap. By 2 o'clock exactly, my firm would legally convert that mountain of debt into a controlling 80% stake in Apex Solutions. The family thought they were keeping their empire. In reality, they had already lost it, and I was simply arriving to hand them their eviction notices. But before I could deliver those eviction notices, before I could walk back into that building as the executioner they never saw coming, I had to face a betrayal I never saw coming either, one that was waiting for me inside my own home. The Maybach glided to a smooth halt in front of a soaring ultramodern high-rise in the city's most exclusive district. The doorman recognized the vehicle and stepped forward, opening the heavy glass door with a deeply respectful nod. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open, silently revealing my hidden sanctuary, a sprawling $12 million penthouse with panoramic views of the skyline, custom, imported furniture, and museum-quality art. A pristine world completely separate from the toxic grip of my family. Nobody in the Apex Circle knew this place existed. Not my parents, not Cameron, not Lexi. The only person who had access to this sanctuary was Todd, my boyfriend of 2 years. I had always believed Todd was my safe harbor. When I returned home exhausted from ruthlessly building my firm, he was the one pouring the wine and listening to my frustrations. I walked across the plush carpet, expecting to find him in the kitchen, making his morning coffee. But the room was empty. A low voice drifted down the hallway from my private study. I approached quietly, assuming he was on a work call. But as I drew closer, the specific cadence of his voice and the name he spoke made my blood run instantly cold. Yes, Cameron, I am telling you. You have absolutely nothing to worry about, Todd was saying, a sickeningly ingratiating tone dripping from his voice. Naomi is completely oblivious. She left for this office early this morning thinking she was actually going to be doing data entry. She genuinely believes your father is trying to help her. He paused, listening to my brother on the other end of the line. I know, Todd chuckled. A cruel, mocking sound that sent a shockwave of absolute disgust through my chest. She is delusional. She keeps rambling about her little startup investments, but I have kept her totally distracted just like we agreed. She is manageable. Now, regarding that vice president of business development position we discussed, you promised me the title, and the six-figure salary would be finalized before the end of the quarter. I am doing my part, Cameron. I am keeping the family embarrassment out of your hair. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the back of the man I thought I loved. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously calculated, that it temporarily stole the breath from my lungs. Todd was not my safe harbor. He was a spy. A paid informant planted in my life by my own brother. He was leaking my daily schedule, my private conversations, my emotional state, directly to the family that despised me. All to secure a prestigious job title at a company that was secretly bankrupt. He had sold my trust to advance his own pathetic career. The pieces of the past few months rapidly locked into place with blinding clarity. The sudden phone calls from Catherine, demanding to know where I was on specific weekends. Harrison somehow knowing exactly which coffee shop I frequented on Tuesday mornings. Cameron making snide, highly specific remarks about my supposed financial struggles. They had not been guessing. They had a direct informant sleeping in my bed. I took a single deliberate step into the study. The sound of my designer heel clicking against the hardwood floor was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Todd whipped around. His eyes widened in sheer absolute panic. His hand shook violently as he scrambled to press the end call button on his smartphone. The device slipped from his sweaty fingers and clattered loudly onto the polished mahogany desk. For a man who had just spent 10 minutes confidently negotiating his corporate future with my brother, he currently looked like a terrified child caught stealing from a cash register. Naomi, sweetheart, he stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. It is not what you think. I know how that sounded, but you have to understand. Cameron called me out of nowhere. He was just asking questions about how you were adjusting. I was just humoring him to keep the peace. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply crossed my arms and stared at him with absolute freezing contempt. Humoring him, I repeated softly. The words hung in the silence, heavy and dangerous. For humoring my brother by explicitly telling him I was completely oblivious. You were humoring him by promising to keep me manageable and distracted. You were humoring him by demanding a six-figure vice president title at Apex Solutions in exchange for your continued espionage services. Todd physically recoiled as I recited his exact phrases back to him. The color drained from his face. He realized instantly I had not just caught the end of his conversation. I had heard the entire transaction. I had heard him negotiate the price of my privacy. They are your family, Naomi. Todd blurted out, shifting from denial to desperate justification. Harrison reached out to me months ago. He said you were living in a fantasy world. He told me you needed an intervention before you ruined your life completely. I was only trying to protect you. The absolute audacity of his gaslighting was staggering. He was actually trying to convince me that selling my daily schedule to my abusive father and corrupt brother was an act of profound romantic protection. I did it for us. Todd snapped, his fear morphing into defensive anger. You refuse to communicate with them. You isolate yourself in this massive apartment. Harrison offered me a genuine opportunity. I stepped up to be the man in this relationship. I secured a vice president position so we would not have to worry about money when your little startup ventures finally fail. He looked around my $12 million penthouse, drank my imported wine, slept in my custom bed, and somehow convinced himself that I was a financial failure who desperately needed his mediocre corporate intervention. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my secured tablet. I did not waste my breath arguing against his delusions. I simply tapped the screen a few times, accessing the encrypted files I used to manage my personal real estate portfolio. I walked over to the mahogany desk, stood right next to him, and placed the glowing tablet directly in his line of sight. "Read the highlighted document," I commanded. Todd scoffed, rolling his eyes. But as his gaze dropped to the screen, his arrogant smirk instantly froze. He blinked, leaning closer, his eyes scanning the dense legal text of the property deed. He read the purchase price first. $12 million paid entirely in cash. Then his eyes darted to the top of the document, where the name of the sole exclusive owner was printed in bold, undeniable letters. My name. The tablet slipped from his fingers and hit the desk with a sharp clack. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, like a suffocating fish. "You own this entire penthouse," Todd whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "I own many things, Todd," I replied smoothly. "What fascinates me most is not that you chose to betray me. It is how incredibly cheap you were when you sold your loyalty. You traded your integrity for a vice president title at a company that has not turned a profit in 4 years. They are currently drowning in over $60 million of defaulted loans." Todd shook his head, frantically backing away from the desk. "No," Harrison said, "they have an investor. He said a billionaire is coming today." I did not wait for his pathetic response. I reached under the lip of the mahogany desk and pressed my thumb against a concealed biometric sensor. A subtle chime echoed through the room, followed immediately by a steady red light blinking on the security panel mounted near the door. Todd stared at the blinking red light, his chest heaving. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. "We can talk about this. I was stupid. I love you." I looked at my Patek Philippe watch, noting the precise position of the second hand. "You have exactly 3 minutes," I said. "You may take one single bag from the master bedroom closet. Only the items you brought with you when you moved in 6 months ago. Anything purchased with my money will remain here. If you attempt to take anything that belongs to me, my security team will detain you for grand larceny." The sheer terror finally overrode his shock. Todd spun around and sprinted down the hallway toward the master suite, his dress shoes slipping frantically against the polished marble. I listened to the chaotic sounds of his panic echoing from down the hall. Drawers being ripped open, hangers clattering, zippers tearing in a desperate rush. I remained standing in the study, utterly motionless. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Exactly 2 minutes and 50 seconds later, the heavy oak double doors of my penthouse swung open. 2 towering security operatives stepped into the entryway, their dark suits immaculately tailored, their expressions completely neutral. Todd stumbled out of the master suite, gasping for breath, clutching a cheap canvas gym bag to his chest. His designer tie was askew, his hair disheveled, sweat pouring down his face. He stopped dead when he saw the 2 guards blocking the exit. "Naomi," he pleaded one last time, dropping to his knees right there on the expensive rug. "Do not do this. I have nowhere to go. I quit my consulting job because Harrison promised me the vice president role today. Harrison is going to be fired for financial fraud at 2 o'clock today," I stated coldly. "Apex Solutions will cease to exist in its current form by sunset. You traded your career for a phantom position at a bankrupt company." "Escort him out," I commanded, shifting my gaze to the operatives. They moved, instantly grabbing Todd by his upper arms and hauling him to his feet with effortless strength. He thrashed weakly against their grip, but it was entirely useless. They dragged him backward toward the open doors. "You cannot do this to me," Todd screamed, his voice echoing shrilly. "I was trying to save you." I did not answer. I simply pressed this automated panel on the wall, and the heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off his pathetic shouting with a solid, definitive thud. The electronic locks engaged with a heavy click. I was finally completely alone. Within the span of a few hours, I had been publicly humiliated and fired by my arrogant sister-in-law. I had been digitally attacked and gaslit by my own parents. I had discovered that the man sleeping in my bed was a paid informant selling my privacy for a job title. The double betrayal should have shattered me. It should have sent me spiraling into the exact kind of hysterical breakdown my family always claimed I was prone to. Instead, the betrayal acted as a forge. The intense heat of their treachery burned away any lingering traces of guilt or familial loyalty. It solidified my resolve into unbreakable steel. They had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they viewed me as nothing more than a convenient victim to be used, abused, and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. It was time to leave this personal mess behind and step fully into the role of the apex predator. I stepped into my massive walk-in closet, the soft motion sensor lights illuminating rows of designer garments. I reached up and unbuttoned the cheap, unremarkable blouse my mother had insisted I wear for my new data entry position. She had actually mailed it to me last week with a passive-aggressive note, suggesting I try to look presentable for once. I let the fabric drop to the floor and kicked it aside. I would never wear a costume of submission for that family again. I pulled out a razor-sharp bespoke midnight blue suit crafted by my personal tailor in Milan. The fabric was immaculate, the cut severe, and completely unapologetic. It was the armor of a woman who commanded boardrooms, not one who cowered in lobbies. I slipped into a crisp, white silk shirt, fastened the tailored blazer, and strapped a heavy diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe around my wrist. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The vulnerable, eager-to-please daughter was completely dead. The ruthless chief executive officer was ready to take the wheel. I sat down at my expansive glass desk and booted up the encrypted multi-monitor communication station. The screens flared to life. On the primary monitor, Mitchell sat at a massive conference table surrounded by thick stacks of legal binders. On the adjacent screens, my elite team of forensic auditors were already logged in. "Good morning," Naomi Mitchell said. The asset freeze on Apex Solutions was executed flawlessly. Their banking accounts are completely locked. Their corporate credit lines severed. Their payroll systems frozen. As of 10:15 this morning, Harrison cannot even authorize the purchase of printer paper. "Excellent," I replied. "Now show me the final audit reports. I want to see exactly how deep my brother managed to bury this company." David, my lead forensic auditor, shared his screen. A complex web of financial ledgers materialized in front of me. "It is significantly worse than we initially projected," he stated. Cameron did not just pad invoices. He created an entire network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He authorized massive monthly payouts, claiming they were essential international freight partners. We tracked the routing numbers directly to private accounts, solely controlled by Cameron. "How much did he steal?" I asked. "Give me the exact figure." Over the past 4 years, Cameron has successfully embezzled just over $14 million from Apex Solutions, David confirmed. He used corporate funds to purchase 2 custom Lamborghinis fully paid in cash. He leased a massive luxury yacht for a 6-week vacation in the Maldives last summer. He even used company money to purchase a $3 million vacation home in Aspen under his wife's maiden name. Lexi has been living like royalty on stolen corporate capital. My jaw tightened. Lexi had stood in the lobby just hours ago wearing designer clothes, bought with stolen money, and called me a charity case. "What about Harrison?" I asked. Mitchell smiled, a cold, predatory expression. He held up a thick manila folder. "Harrison noticed 2 years ago. But instead of reporting his son, he chose to cover it up to protect his golden child. We recovered the deleted tax returns your father filed with the federal government. Harrison personally signed off on massively inflated operational losses. He intentionally committed federal tax fraud to hide Cameron's embezzlement. The final pieces of the puzzle locked into place. This is the final nail in the coffin," Mitchell stated. "They committed wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal tax evasion. The paper trail is completely undeniable. If we hand this over to the authorities, Harrison and Cameron will face a minimum of 10 years in federal prison." "We are not handing it over just yet," I said. "We are going to use this to execute them in the boardroom. I want them to look at the undeniable proof of their own corruption. I want them to realize that the daughter they banished is the only reason they are not currently in handcuffs." "Prepare the termination documents," I ordered. "We leave in 1 hour." Mitchell nodded. The finalized capitalization table appeared on my center monitor. A massive, solid wedge of deep navy blue consumed the vast majority of the chart, leaving only a microscopic sliver of gray for my family. "The debt-to-equity conversion is officially complete and recorded with the state," Mitchell stated. "Your primary holding company now legally possesses exactly 80.4% of all active voting shares in Apex Solutions. As of this very second, Naomi, you are the absolute majority owner. I stared at the navy blue wedge representing my absolute dominance over the empire my father loved more than his own children. The descent from my penthouse to the underground loading dock was swift and entirely silent. A fleet of 4 jet black armored SUVs was idling perfectly in line. My private security detail stood at strict attention. Mitchell and the junior partners filed into the trailing vehicles with practiced military precision. At exactly 45, the motorcade turned sharply onto the sweeping circular drive that framed the main plaza of Apex Solutions. Just hours earlier, I had walked up this pavement wearing a cheap blouse, bracing myself for menial data entry and expected family obsession. I had arrived as a supposed charity case. Now I was arriving as the absolute owner of the very concrete beneath the tires. The vehicle came to a synchronized halt. My security lead opened my door and stood guard. I placed my designer heel onto the pavement. The bespoke midnight blue suit hugged my frame, perfectly transforming me from the victim they remembered into a ruthless corporate executioner. As we stepped through the glass and into the grand marble lobby, the shift in atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. The bustling noise of the midday crowd abruptly died down. Employees holding coffees literally froze. Heads turned, eyes widened. The frantic whispering began almost immediately. They recognized me, of course. Many had witnessed Lexi screaming at me in this exact spot at 8:45 that morning. But the woman walking toward them now bore no resemblance to the quiet, compliant girl who had surrendered her temporary visitor badge. I was radiating an aura of sheer, unadulterated power backed by a wall of intimidating corporate lawyers and hired muscle. Directly ahead, the main security checkpoints stood between the atrium and the elevator banks. Behind the marble desk stood the exact same 2 large security guards Lexi had commanded to throw me out just hours prior. I watched their expressions transform from routine boredom to sheer absolute panic as they saw me leading a literal corporate army directly toward their station. The taller guard physically recoiled his hand, instinctively dropping toward his radio. He looked terrified, sweat breaking out on his forehead as he recognized the woman he had nearly put his hands on that morning. I did not slow my pace. I simply locked eyes with him, delivering a glare so freezing and authoritative it pinned his feet firmly to the floor. Mitchell stepped slightly ahead, flashing a titanium black credential card. The moment the guard saw that card, his posture completely collapsed. He slapped the override button on his console. The heavy glass turnstiles snapped open. The very men tasked with keeping me out were now forced to hold the gates wide open for my hostile takeover. The executive elevator surged upward smoothly. Floor 10, floor 15, floor 20. Each passing number felt like a heavy drumbeat leading to a long overdue execution. Harrison, Cameron, and Lexi were waiting at the top, currently swimming in their own arrogance, popping champagne for a billionaire investor they thought would save them. They were happily celebrating the very deal that was about to strip them of everything. Stepping out on the 50th floor, my heels sank silently into the plush monogrammed carpet. At the far end of the corridor stood the main executive boardroom. Its walls were constructed of heavy soundproof glass. But someone had carelessly left one of the mahogany doors cracked open by an inch. The sound of clinking crystals and boisterous laughter spilled out. I held up a hand, silently signaling my team to halt. I wanted to observe them in their natural habitat one last time. I wanted to witness the absolute peak of their arrogant delusion before I burned it all to the ground. Through the narrow gap, the scene played out exactly as I had anticipated. Silver platters piled high with fresh lobster, oysters, and caviar sat completely untouched. Harrison was standing at the head of the room, holding a bottle of Dom Perignon in one hand and a crystal flute in the other. Cameron sat slouched in a leather executive chair, with his feet arrogantly propped up on the polished wood table. Catherine stood beside him, resting an affectionate hand on his shoulder, completely oblivious. Lexi was perched on the edge of the table, tossing her hair and laughing loudly. To Cameron, Harrison announced, raising his glass high. His booming voice echoed clearly for keeping this ship afloat through the storm. Those aggressive creditors thought they could squeeze us, but you navigated the turbulent waters perfectly. And to our new billionaire partner, whoever he is bringing the capital. But we are keeping the control. Cameron cheered, clinking his glass. I told you not to worry, Dad. The creative accounting gave us the exact runway we needed. Once this private equity firm drops the cash injection, I will smooth over the vendor ledgers, and no one will be the wiser. I listened to my brother openly admit to cooking the books, completely unbothered by the federal crimes he had committed. Lexi took a delicate sip. I personally secured the lobby this morning. Handling your sister was the absolute highlight of my week, Cameron. Catherine let out an elegant sigh. Oh, please tell me Naomi did not make a hysterical scene. She did not even have the chance, Lexi bragged. I fired her on the spot. You should have seen her face, Catherine. She looked completely pathetic. I told her she was a charity case and ordered security to throw her out. She just handed over her badge and scurried away like a frightened little mouse. Harrison threw his head back and laughed. Good for you, Lexi. Naomi needed a harsh reality check. She has spent the last decade playing pretend, acting like her ridiculous startup investments meant something. She needed to hit rock bottom to finally learn her station. Exactly, Cameron chimed in. Firing her in front of the entire staff was the best thing for her. Maybe now she will realize she is completely incompetent and stop trying to play in our league. I stood perfectly still in the quiet corridor, my security team waiting silently behind me. I listened to them congratulate themselves on my humiliation. I listened to them justify their cruelty. They were so thoroughly drunk on their own delusions of grandeur they could not even fathom the reality of their situation. They thought they had broken my pride and secured their empire in one masterful stroke. They had absolutely no idea that the executioner was already standing at their door. I turned my head slightly, catching Mitchell's eye. His face was a mask of cold professional anticipation. He gave me a single sharp nod. The documents were ready. The legal trap was locked. I reached out, wrapping my fingers around the cool brass handle of the heavy mahogany door. I did not knock. I did not hesitate. I pushed the door open wide. The heavy doors swung inward with a smooth, silent glide, completely shattering the barrier between their fabricated reality and my absolute truth. The clinking of crystal ceased entirely. The boisterous laughter died in their throats, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. My security operatives moved with immediate lethal efficiency, taking positions flanking the double doors. Mitchell and the 3 junior partners fanned out behind me. I walked directly toward the head of the massive oak conference table. I did not rush. I let the sharp click of my designer heels echo against the polished hardwood floor, measuring the exact distance between my past victimization and my current absolute dominance. Harrison was the first to process the visual anomaly. He lowered his bottle of Dom Perignon, his eyes darting frantically from the imposing security guards to the elite legal standing at my back. Naomi Harrison bellowed, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. What is the meaning of this? How dare you interrupt this meeting? How on earth did you even get past the front desk? Catherine gasped, pressing a hand against her pearl necklace. Naomi, this is highly inappropriate. We are expecting extremely important people in a matter of minutes. Cameron slammed his champagne flute down onto the table, spilling expensive liquid across the polished wood. Are you completely insane, Dad? Call the lobby right now. Naomi, turn around and walk out before we have you arrested for trespassing. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from the head of the table. I did not say a single word. I simply looked at them. The sheer panic vibrating beneath their loud, aggressive demands was palpable. Lexi, fueled by the same unearned confidence she had displayed in the lobby that morning, decided to take matters into her own hands. She marched directly toward me with her chin raised high. I literally fired you at 8:45 this morning, Lexi snarled. I told you that you were a pathetic charity case. You are not an employee here. You think bringing a few rented bodyguards is going to scare us? Nobody is ruining anything. Lexi, I replied, my voice completely devoid of the emotional hysteria she was expecting. The transaction is already complete. Shut your mouth, Harrison roared, slamming his fist against the table. He reached for the platinum intercom console, jabbing the security button repeatedly. Security. Get a response team to the executive boardroom immediately. The intercom emitted nothing but dead, hollow static. The security chief is not going to answer you, Harrison Mitchell stated smoothly, stepping slightly forward. He has received strict encrypted directives from his new employer. Lexi did not wait. Her patience completely evaporated. She lunged forward, raising her hand to physically grab my shoulder. She never made contact. Mitchell moved with blinding, terrifying speed. He stepped directly between us, raising a single rigid arm that stopped Lexi dead in her tracks. Lay a hand on the majority shareholder, Mitchell stated, his voice a freezing, razor-sharp blade, and you will be in federal custody before sunset. The words hit the room like a seismic shock wave. Lexi froze, her mouth hanging open. Cameron stopped, reaching for his cell phone. Catherine let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Harrison stood completely paralyzed, his finger still pressing uselessly against the dead intercom. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. Majority shareholder, Harrison repeated, his voice dropping to a hoarse, ragged whisper. The arrogance had entirely drained from his face. What is he talking about, Naomi? I smiled. It was not a smile of joy, not a smile of forgiveness. It was the smile of an apex predator that had finally cornered its prey. He is telling you to step away from my chair, Harrison, I said softly. The adults are talking now. Harrison stared at me, his eyes wide and completely uncomprehending. He looked at the leather executive chair, then back at me. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out slightly until his broad shoulders hit the heavy glass wall. I stepped forward, positioning myself directly behind the chair. I ran my hand along the smooth leather backrest. This was the exact spot where Harrison had sat for over a decade, dismantling my self-esteem, aggressively rejecting my business proposals, declaring my brother the undisputed genius of the family. I pulled the chair out and sat down smoothly, crossing my legs and folding my hands on the pristine mahogany surface. Mitchell unclasped the brass locks of his heavy leather briefcase. The sharp metallic snaps echoed like gunshots. He extracted the thick red tabbed folio and handed it to me. I lifted the heavy stack of documents and dropped them squarely onto the center of the table. The heavy thud made Catherine physically flinch. You have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of a major private equity conglomerate, I stated, my voice echoing evenly. You have spent the past month begging their representatives for a massive capital injection. You prayed that a billionaire savior would bail you out of the $60 million in defaulted loans currently suffocating this company. You toasted to your own brilliance, just moments ago absolutely convinced you had secured your legacy. I am the billionaire savior, Harrison. My private equity firm, Vanguard Holdings, purchased every single piece of your toxic debt over the last 12 months for pennies on the dollar. And as of 2 o'clock today, we legally executed a hostile debt-to-equity swap. I did not come here to fund your corruption. I came here to collect. Cameron let out a harsh, frantic laugh, shaking his head violently. That is an absolute lie. You are completely bluffing. Vanguard Holdings is a massive international fund. You were begging for a data entry job this morning. Cameron did not wait for an invitation. He lunged forward and snatched the thick stack of documents from the center of the table. His hands were moving frantically as he flipped open the heavy cover. He wanted desperately to find a flaw, a typo, a fake letterhead. I watched him with clinical detachment as his eyes darted across the dense legal text. I watched his gaze track over the formal declarations from the state of Delaware. I watched him find the capitalization table displaying the massive 80.4% voting stake, now permanently controlled by my firm. But the true world-shattering realization did not hit him until he reached the final page. There, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, was the formal corporate registry for Vanguard Holdings. The blood drained from Cameron's face so rapidly, his skin took on a sickly translucent pallor, his jaw went completely slack. His hands began to shake violently, the thick pages rattling loudly in the quiet boardroom. He stopped breathing. He was staring directly at the signature line. He was staring at my name, legally registered and verified as the founder and chief executive officer of the acquiring firm. No, Cameron choked out, his voice barely a wheeze. He dropped the documents onto the table as if they were physically burning his hands. He stumbled backward, knocking his own chair over with a loud crash. This is impossible. This cannot be real. Harrison lunged forward, roughly shoving Cameron aside to snatch the documents. What does it say, Cameron? What on earth does it say? Harrison's eyes scanned the exact same pages. I watched my father, the man who had repeatedly told me I lacked the intellect for business, who had mocked my startups and exiled me from his empire, read the undeniable proof of my absolute supremacy. The muscles in his jaw twitched erratically. His hands gripped the papers so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Catherine rushed to his side. Harrison, what is it? Tell me she is lying. Harrison did not answer her. He could not form the words. He slowly lowered the document, staring at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound, devastating shock. The charity case owns you, I said softly. Every desk, every computer, every patent, and every single dollar flowing through the accounts of this building now belongs exclusively to me. You do not have a silent partner. You do not have a bailout. You have an eviction notice. Lexi stood completely frozen near the catering spread, her earlier viciousness entirely extinguished. She looked at the documents, then at my custom designer suits, then at the imposing wall of elite corporate lawyers standing behind me. Her hands began to tremble as the reality of what she had done at 8:45 that morning finally registered. She had publicly humiliated, mocked, and enthusiastically fired the new owner of the entire corporation. Mitchell stepped forward, placing 3 sleek black folders onto the mahogany table. I slid the top folder deliberately across the polished wood until it hit my father's fingertips. Open it, Harrison, I commanded. He hesitated. He flipped the cover open. Inside was the comprehensive forensic audit highlighting every single fraudulent transaction he had authorized over the past 4 years. As the new majority shareholder of Apex Solutions, I stated I am exercising my right to immediately restructure the executive board. Harrison, you are officially terminated as Chief Executive Officer effective this exact second. You are being fired for cause, specifically gross financial misconduct and federal tax fraud. Harrison's face turned an ashen shade of gray. You cannot do this. My contract guarantees a severance package. I have a golden parachute.